Hector Sanchez with LCLAA, Labor Council for Latin American Advancement. Recently we launched a report on the condition of Latino workers, and we found, as we expected, that Latino workers are the most vulnerable and the most exploited workers in the nation. But something that we didn't expect at this level was to find the condition of trabajadoras, Latinas in the workplace. Horrible working conditions when it looks to wage theft, health and safety, but particularly sexual harassment and rape, especially from documented women. We're about to launch a campaign on Trabajadoras, and we've been looking for partnership, not only for organizations, but also with the administration. We met with our good friend Sara Manzano, but can you talk a little bit about the issue of Trabajadoras and what are the possibilities for partnerships and what is the administration doing in that particular area?
And I would want to work with Sarah on that in terms of a response, but I would say the more we do together, the more we partner across the parts of our department, the better the outcomes are going to be. Sarah talks passionately and eloquently about the fact that women are suffering more in terms of wages, and Latinas are suffering even more. And to hear other examples, as you're talking about, of actual abuse or hardship in the workplace, that doesn't meet the goals of the Employment Training Administration. So anything that we can do to partner with that, we would be open to, absolutely.
Let me just say that one of the things that we've been doing is meeting internally to talk about the issues of violence in the workplace, especially when it comes to vulnerable workers. When you talk about hotel mates, when you talk about domestic workers, when you're talking about migrant women who are in the fields, they're very much, those jobs are very vulnerable to the kind of sexual harassment and sexual assault. We just had a meeting last week across the board in which most of us met to talk about how do we address these issues from a more holistic approach, cutting across all the lines. So all of our partners are working together to try to address some of these issues.
OSHA is about to launch a new initiative also on workplace violence in general. We are trying to do more enforcement in that area. If you're vulnerable to violence, if you're attacked on the workplace, that is a workplace hazard. We don't have standards on that, but we can do enforcement under what we call our general duty clause. And we plan to do more of that to get that word out also to everyone, especially Latinas who are vulnerable to that they do have rights in the workplace and they can come to OSHA for help on that.
I think that this is an issue that's complex, in part because Wage Hour has experience in like areas of trafficking, et cetera, and we have trafficking task forces where we work with the Department of Justice and the FBI, et cetera, to when we detect that in a workplace to respond. I think even that can be tricky, but certainly with sexual harassment and issues of rape, you have even a more difficult situation and to try to figure out how to be most helpful, how to get the appropriate response to that crime, and not yet through routes that women in particular feel comfortable coming forward. And so one of the things we're really going to have to think about is how do we intersect with the organizations where women trust that they're going to get the help, and they have more expertise sort of navigating the criminal system to get the remedy that these folks or these women need. And Wage Hour is working on trying to figure out what role it plays in that, because we hear from our stakeholders that our methods for how we deal with things like trafficking and peonage may not be as appropriate for particularly sexual assault and sex discrimination, and that's going to require a different kind of response. So that's where the Women's Bureau, et cetera, where we start to sit down and figure out how do we build those connections, because previously was if we found trafficking, we had the network with the trafficking task forces we worked through, particularly with the FBI and the Department of Justice, to have a response. But this is a little different situation and requires potentially a different strategy.
Sanchez, Executive Director of LCLAA, Latino Labor. One of the main concerns of the organization is children working in agriculture. We have a lot of evidence of children even as young as 6 to 8 years already working in agriculture under horrible conditions, touching pesticides and just difficult situations that children should be exposed to. There are some legal loopholes particularly in agriculture, that allow children to work at an earlier age in the field of agriculture. We've been talking about this issue with the Department of Labor and some other agencies, but we want to hear what are you doing in the Department of Labor to protect children in agriculture, or what is the kind of partnerships that organizations like LCLAA can have to help improve the conditions of those children?
So we don't actually deal with the labor force. We deal in terms of the farm labor workforce themselves, the families. We deal in trying to get them to safe, decent, affordable housing. We make sure that as they're migrating, they have access to resources that they need, whether it's through our SNAP program, which is the old food stamps, or the women, infants, and children's programs that we run. But that's pretty much the extent of what we do when it comes to the farm labor population. We do stay in contact with labor to make sure that we're all looking at the same definitions, because many times across regulations, the wording and the definition is different of a farm labor worker. So we make sure that we're all in sync when it comes to how the rules apply to them as workers and how the rules apply to them as a family unit and living.
And where the administrator was talking from was from the rural development mission area, where we finance everything from housing to small business loans to infrastructure loans. But at the department level, we have a farm worker coordinator now. Her name's Christine Chavez, and she's working with farm worker groups. I see a lot of nodding heads, so I'm sure you all know who I'm talking about, and she's probably been in touch with you all. And I think it's the first time that the Department of Agriculture has actually engaged with farm worker groups to try in a more cooperative and a partnership kind of way. So that's, one way we've been trying to address some of the issues you talked about.
Just a quick comment, and I want to echo what the lady said about Social Security. It is very, very important. We're really worried with the announcement of the President last week that Social Security and Medicare are on the table. As an organization, we founded Latinos for Secure Communities in 2005, and we relaunched this alliance this year. We're bringing more national organizations, and we are going to push the administration strongly to not touch Social Security as a way to move forward in these negotiations. The Latino community, like it was already said, particularly is going to be affected with Social Security. We're 10 years younger. We're already contributing. We have much more possibilities to end up in poverty if we don't have access to Social Security. So as a Latino community in general, we can say, I think because of these alliances in Social Security, that we're going to strongly oppose any changes or any negotiations when it comes to Social Security.
Amen. Great. Thank you. J.R. Gonzalez with NHPO and former President and CEO of the United States Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Friday, Wall Street Journal, page 1, I saw an interesting article about a Keystone pipeline, Keystone XL pipeline. We all know that it's going to take small business and jobs to turn this economy around. And I'm just wondering what the hesitation is. We have a pipeline that's going to be an infusion of about $13 billion of private money, not tax money, not stimulus money, coming into the U.S. Perryman report says about 40% of those construction workers are going to be Latino, which is going to help our community, and it's also going to help us to reduce at least our dependency on Saudi oil about 40%. But yet there seems to be delay after delay after delay when there's shovel-ready jobs that can put people to work immediately, have more security or energy security for the future, and help this country and put people to work immediately. I'm just going, what is the delay? Because it seems like every time we make some progress, there seems to be a delay on this project.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I can't speak to the particulars about that specific project, but I will say more broadly, I mean, this is one of the things that the president sort of keeps drumming the beat on, which is that there are all of these sort of things that we could do right now, today, to address sort of jobs. And one of them, there's a bill in Congress pending right now for an infrastructure bank, more funding to infrastructure projects. I think everyone is in agreement that that's something that we could do right now.
If we have projects like that we can do right now,
right.
The question is, what is the delay in actually putting Americans back to work?
Right. Well, I think part of the challenge here is that, we have the Recovery Act had a large amount of money for infrastructure spending. We're sort of seeing a lot of that money, those projects are being funded, and a lot of the more recent round of spending has gone out and sort of we're running out, which I think is why the president keeps sort of pounding the drum for an infrastructure bank so that we can have broader financing of those kinds of shovel-ready projects.
Hector Sanchez, Executive Director of LCLAA and also the co-chair of the Immigration Community for LCLAA, which comprises 30 national Latino organizations. I think from our perspective, it's very fair to say that the Latino community is frustrated with the lack of real delivery on immigration and the issue of immigration when it comes to from the administration on the issue of immigration. I think what we have seen, and this is like internal discussions that we have had, is a continuation of enforcement on the policies that we saw for 8 years during the Bush administration. We were expecting serious changes, and we haven't seen that. We request that before the elections of 2012, we need to see real action, and we know that the usual answer is going to be, well, we're trying to work with Congress to look for immigration reform. We fully support immigration reform, but we want to see action from the president, and the first thing that we'd like to ask is an executive order to stop the deportation of dreamers. And I think that would be a solid example that the administration is committed to the Latino community and the issue of immigration.
So, Hector, thank you for your question, and I know that you need to continue, as everyone here in this room, to hold us accountable, both from the reforms that we're making on secure communities, but also the work that Director Mayorkas is doing around improving the legal immigration system and the processing of applications. The president feels very strongly that there is a lot of work to be done to improve the case-by-case process of reviewing petitions for deferred action, humanitarian parole in place, things like that. And I think that the prosecutorial discretion memo that Margot referenced that was released a couple of weeks ago is an important step in that process, but we know that there's more that needs to be done. And Margot referenced the idea of there being better tracking. We also think that there needs to be better information provided to individuals so that they understand that they can come forward and ask for this type of relief. We are focused on streamlining that process. He has said that he feels that the focus really needs to be on improving that process and on making the meaningful legislative reforms that we think are really the only true answer to the issue. So we feel as if we were to pass an executive order, sign an executive order, that the conversation would move away from meaningful legislative reform and would end up being a debate around enforcement, not on reform. So that's our focus on streamlining and improving the case-by-case process and also focusing people on the real solution that we need, which is comprehensive reform.